As with any journey, especially those where you don't have any idea where you're going, you got to figure out where you're going to start. And with the smart grid, it's no different. For many different organizations, there are a variety of reasons why people get involved in the smart grid. Some folks are interested in the advantages of smart metering. Other folks are interested in producing consumer value through rate-oriented trials. You've got a variety of different technologies that exist to make the existing infrastructure more efficient. Each of these goals, each of these tactics in developing the smart grid carries with it its own risk. In the graphic that you see in front of you, you can see that there's a bunch of new components that are being provided that drive some of this customer-oriented value in the smart grid. But each of these carries with it the natural vulnerabilities that occur when a new technology is introduced in any industry. Are the systems secure? We're taking in a lot of data now. Is that data being managed in a way that is secure? We've talked to a lot of folks who are busily engaged in rolling out of smart metering infrastructures who don't yet really understand how they're going to accommodate all of that data and how they're going to segment what should be held private and what should be released to the public. Some of that private data relates to financial information, and as a result, there's now the opportunity for fraud. If we don't do a good enough job within the smart grid of identifying who people really are and what's at the other end of that wire, it's really hard to guarantee that people don't take advantage of this system for their own financial gain. And the last thing, and this thing is really well known to those of you in the utility industry, we cannot afford downtime. This is a very different world than exists in the typical IT space, where a failure of security should be reflected by a failure of the service. We talk about that as being failed closed. Basically, if this thing doesn't pass security muster, I don't want it to work at all. Well, the grid can't work like that. Even in the face of security challenges, the lights have got to go on. And so this is a very unique and very complicated application of security theory to a system which has always got to be available and always has to be up.
Another thing to think about in plotting your course, again, in the midst of so much uncertainty, is coming back sort of to yourself and your organization and saying, why am I doing this in the first place? What are the primary drivers that either I care about, my organization cares about, and our customers care about? Sometimes it has to do with improving experience, improving performance, improving the bottom line. Those are efficiencies that we're expecting to get out of the smart grid. As Jack said, reliability in the energy sector is number one, so no downtime ever. And that's going to happen even in a system that's somewhat less secure because it's going to be so much more resilient and so much more redundant. Sometimes it's compliance related, thinking about, for example, the NERC, Critical Infrastructure Protection Guidelines, and how to make sure your organization not only shows that it's in compliance with those guidelines, but also actually is in compliance. And this is all complementary to the overall security posture of the operation. The energy sector in the past has been typified by a lack of communication, with very little exchange of information or ideas between those who generate power and those who consume it. Well, the smart grid is about to change all that. Two-way flows of power and communication make one thing clear that's never been clear before, and that is that the responsibility for keeping the power on and for using it efficiently is yours. Each and every person who's on the supply side and the demand side has an important role to play.
In talking about the responsibilities that Andy just described, it's useful to think about this matrix. There are external threats and there are internal threats. There are accidental things that happen and there are intentional things that happen. Each of these four blocks represents a different area of concern and likely a different area of focus as you're managing your security strategy for the smart grid. Understanding challenges such as data leakage and data storage, understanding the possibility that different systems will be vulnerable, or that individuals on the inside, employees or contractors, could be motivated to attack the system, makes for a very different approach to managing the security of the system and also monitoring the way in which that system is being utilized. External factors, such as forces of nature, the political climate, can change immediately the way in which the system behaves and the way in which the system as a whole will respond. And the external threat is one that we all know well, and Andy spoke of it earlier, and that cannot be denied either. We've talked about a lot of different topics today. We've touched them mainly at a high level, and I know that some of you are looking for something a bit more detailed, and recognize that we'll be talking more in detail about each of these subjects over the course of the coming volumes of these webcasts. But sometimes you just want a checklist. And this checklist that we've presented to you here gives you some insight into the steps you're going to want to take as you approach the varying areas of security that we've talked about through the course of this presentation. It's not meant to be exhaustive, and it's also not meant to provide you with enough detail that if you're not already familiar with the area, that you'll be able to execute on it as though it were a task item all its own. But it does provide you with some guidance and some areas to think about, particularly as you prepare for the next set of webcasts from the Smart Grid Security blog.
We try to be a good source of information about the smart grid, where it's going, and where to start in matters particularly related to security, privacy, and compliance. But there's a handful of organizations who are truly charting the course for the entire industry and for the country. Here's a few of them. FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. This is a great source of information for consumers and businesses who are trying to find out what's going on in the regulatory sector and also in the markets. NERC is the North American Electrical Reliability Corporation, and they are under the guidance of FERC. These guys are setting the standards, as we mentioned earlier. The CIPs, the Critical Infrastructure Protection Standards, are one of the primary drivers that's helping guide the utilities' actions in the security sphere. NIST is the National Institute of Science and Technology. NIST has a bunch of work groups that are related to the evolution of the smart grid. Sometimes people say NIST is setting the standards. From what we've seen, that's not their job so much as to arbitrate between the different standards bodies and the different industry groups who are trying to have their way over what the smart grid is going to look like. The DOEs, the Department of Energy, and the Gridwise Alliance, these guys are fantastic sources of information, making sure that the government is moving in harmony with industry and that we're all hitting the milestones that we're trying to reach. As you know, Jack used the word accelerant earlier on. The smart grid evolution is moving at a very frantic pace, and we want to make sure there's no missteps along the way.
We'd like to thank you for spending some time with us here today in the first of the series of webcasts on smart grid security from Indy and I at the Smart Grid Security blog. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send them to us. There's a feedback link on the Smart Grid Security blog, and we'll respond to them as soon as we get them. But remember, this is only webcast number 1. In the coming weeks and months, there are going to be more. And we hope that you can attend our next webcast, which is going to be on the challenges of data security in the new smart grid.
And over the rest of the year, we'll be hitting a bunch of different topics, albeit in more detail than we did today, on system security. We're going to talk about standards and regulations in more detail. We're going to explore the soft grid, or essentially the software that comprises the smart grid, including customer portals. We're going to talk about AMI, take a moment to look at things from the customer's point of view and from the chief security officer's point of view in the utility. When there are breaks, when there are problems, when the breaches, we know they're going to happen, what to do to not get caught flat-footed in those things. And at the end, we'll wrap it all up.
So listen, thanks for bearing with us. This was our first one. They can only get better from here. The topic is important. Andy and I are dedicated to it, and we're going to keep presenting the best way we know how this information to you on a monthly basis.
Thanks, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.